All right, we're good.
Okay, I would like to call to order the March 15th meeting of the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency Housing Committee. Do we have any public comment or anything? No one has expressed. Written comments have been received. Okay, excellent. Any changes to the agenda? Hearing none, I guess we can proceed to the review of outcomes of the housing policy to date. Heather has provided us very helpfully, I guess Ina provided us very helpfully with.
I'm sorry, it's
Thank you both for your efforts.
my new glasses. I can actually see the word.
One page.
So here you have all the projects that have been approved since the housing policy was first adopted. I believe it was adopted in July of 2019. Carpenter Park. The affordable housing units are nearing completion. The market rate units, we're hoping that will break ground later this year, but they are wrangling, as many projects are, with increased construction costs. So, that's
Are there
hopefully
changes to that project that might have it back in front of us?
not that I'm aware of. If they can't make the financials work, there may be some changes.
Because I mean, I heard that they were thinking about reconfiguring the buildings.
Yes.
I haven't really heard much.
Yeah, but until there's some definitive, I really don't know yet.
Have they closed on the abatement?
Yeah, we generally put them under abatement during the construction period.
Right.
So yes, the affordable piece and the medical office building would be, but the middle one.
So there hasn't actually been a closing yet. So we're not actually under pilot or anything.
It is under pilot. That was the one that we started talking about in December and, may come back to the IDA. What happens in this community, what we've tried to do is that I'll give you an example, and I won't use the real numbers. I'll just use easy numbers. So the Marriott, they come in for an incentive. They're paying $4,000 a year in property taxes on vacant land. So the proposed incentive is, 100% abatement off the improvement, which they think is going to be valued at 18 million. So the projections, and these projections are part of their bank financing because it's part of their income and expense. The projection would be year one, 100% abatement off 18 million, year two, 100% off, or 90% off of 18 million. Over time, that value might increase. Whatever the value is, the abatement is a percentage of that, but it's the improvement, 18 million. What happens in this community, because we do 100% assessments, is that they start construction, a year goes by, they're halfway done with the building, the county assessor comes in and reassesses and says, oh, you're halfway done. I'm going to assess your improvement at 9 million. So you're under construction, you're not generating any revenues, but you have to pay property taxes on a $9 million improvement. And then the next year, they finish the improvement, people move in, you hit the tax status date, it becomes valued at 18 million. Guess what? The assessor gives them 100% abatement off the difference between 9 million and 18 million. So their actual abatement is much less than what was projected and much less than what we anticipated. So what we do is now we put the pilots in place and say during construction, they're paying the same as they were pre-construction. And then after construction is really when that percentage abatement schedule kicks in. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
It's the way that in talking to our attorneys and talking to assessment that we would handle this. Because really, and going back to that Marriott example, our intent at the IDA was to abate off of the new value of the improvement, 18 million,
Right.
not half of it.
Mhm.
So long answer to your question. The middle part of Cuga Park, what we did is we put it under pilot during or construction or pre-construction so that land value would not increase. And we do our best. Some of the pilots say land value as of XX date. This one was one big parcel and they split it into 3 tax parcels. So what we did with each of them is we said, we think the land value is going to be X, Y, and Z, and that's what they'll pay on the land values. Well, the land value for the middle parcel is actually much less than what we had anticipated. So they're paying property taxes on like a $2.5 million in a set land value, which we thought was going to be, but the actual land value is only like 1.2. So they're paying more, and that was why they had come back to the IDA, and there were all kinds of questions. And I sort of said, step back, because now we're going to have to look at the other parcels, and we put those under pilot differently. And to be honest, I can't make hide nor hair of the total acreage, the total the total value pre-construction and what the 3 values are together. You'd think they'd add to the same as the pre-construction. They don't, they're not even close. So I've just sort of been struggling with what to do around that one. So I'm hoping that answered your question in a very long way. I wanted to just sort of run through the Arno Ithaca 2 is completed. So that first payment should come later this year in August, and they're split over 3 years. That was the original policy. We sort of let them pay over 3 years out of operating expenses rather than borrowing with their construction budget to pay upfront, which we no longer allow unless they're going to pay a premium to do that. The Ithacan is on track to be completed this year, so I'm assuming that those payments need to shift a year because there'll be a year lag. And then Asteri will not be paying because they're 100% affordable. They're a little bit behind construction, but I don't think terribly so. 401 East State Street, there may be some changes to the unit mix due to extremely rising costs over there. So that one's probably going to come back to the IDA in April or May, some modifications. So there will likely be a higher housing payment. But to be determined. Cliff Street Retreat should close this year. They're paying yep.
Sorry, maybe I should read it, but I'm curious what the rationale, because I was around behind the Ithacan choosing to do a split as opposed to one or the other.
That's actually Nels's fault.
Yeah.
We mandated that there had to be 10% affordable on site. We give them the choice, but at the end, we wanted some affordable on site, right? And then they decided to just take 50% of it on site and then 50% as a contribution.
Right. Well, I think it was just a matter of like the 2 policies didn't quite stack, right? You had already negotiated before they came to IDA that there would be 10% affordable.
Minimum 10%.
And then when it arrived at IDA, it was like, well, they're already doing 10%. So, we agreed to just give them half the payment amount because they're doing half the policy already. And I think, we offered them the option of either going from 10 to 20 or making the payment, and they chose to make the payment.
Great, thank you.
And then we changed the policy, recognizing that the Community Housing Development Fund really is short of funds, and they'd like to see some of that funding up front, rather than on the back end. So the policy was changed, and the housing payment is due at closing. So the next three projects we anticipate should close this year. So there should be an infusion of cash into the Community Housing Fund this year.
Is the post retreat coming back? I don't know if they've actually, I couldn't make sense of the article about their changes, if they were actually changing unit count or if they were just
Cliff Street?
figuring, yeah,
I didn't see anything.
they reconfigured the, like, whatever the out parts, there's like an extra building they were building, and they were gonna build like a couple of buildings, and now it's one, but I couldn't tell if it was actually a change in unit count.
Is it a hotel?
Just a, right, and so
Oh, I will check
to
it.
check in with the developer on that
Yeah.
and see if that needs another to come back before us again.
So that's where we're at. And then I have the Hive down there. The Hive is sort of tabled right now. It has not been approved, so we jumped the gun in adding it to the total, so I sort of just moved it underneath.
Did you say for the Ithacan, that needs to be pushed out a year?
Yeah, because the way it's written is that they pay the fee
When you're after completion?
1 year after completion.
So we could
So,
take the 2023 and move
Yeah,
payment to
I'm gonna move
2026.
24, 5, and 6, yeah.
So just bump it down to one.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So any questions on how we're doing? I mean, overall, our new numbers, if things proceed as planned, 1,100 units, 243 are affordable, and 3.4 million is going into that Community Housing Development Fund.
Assuming everybody.
Assuming
Actually, that's where-
can't take the check to the bank until they close.
I think in email, you kind of indicated that 401 East, the new one, not the redevelopment, is the shakiest.
They do have approvals from the city for more units. I mean, basically, they couldn't make the financials work. So they went back to the city, asked for a variance for another floor. So there's more units. The costs have gone up. The number of beds hasn't appreciably increased. They just, rather than doing 3-bedroom units, they did more 1-bedroom units. They changed the unit mix. So, to be safe, I know there was a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion around this project. So it's coming back to the IDA. Costs have increased. There's more than 10% change in units, not a more than 10% change in beds, but
Right.
we look at units. So the square footage hasn't changed really appreciably.
They did add a floor,
They did.
but it's like a partial floor, right? It's not the whole building, right.
So they're coming back. Any other questions? I mean, I think overall, we've done work that we should be really proud of in terms of supporting housing units in the urban core and supporting more affordable housing.
That 3.4 million is, more than 8 years of government contributions to that fund. And so,
Well,
I don't know,
yeah.
looking at it,
Just to put it into perspective, the Community Housing Development Fund started in 2009. And they've awarded 5.9 million.
Mhm.
So this is pretty significant increase in funding for the community housing development.
And if I could add in there, we're gonna start looking at next month of what in April, at our April meeting for the Community Housing Development Fund, what this means to us, and looking at our policies, our grant ratios and things like that. So we haven't really delved into it yet.
Mhm.
So thank you for kicking off that discussion and analysis.
Mhm.
Yeah, Duck and Annie and I all sit on the Community Housing Development Fund. And I've sort of said, we need workforce housing.
Yeah.
And it's not low income housing. It's not entry level workers. It's, the new finance manager at the county or the new HR director. It's those mid-level professionals, probably with families, that you can't build a house for $300,000. It costs $500,000 to build it. You need to sell it for $500,000. So it's that sort of middle market that if we really want this community to grow and to be strong in terms of attracting and retaining workforce, and it is mid-level management workforce, is there something more that the Community Housing Development Fund could do to support that, for sale units? And it's not 80% of median income, but the stuff just is not being built because the market can't take care of it.
Okay.
And, I'm getting pushback, but I'm going to keep saying it because I, work for the IDA and I work with businesses, and all the businesses say, I can't get a mid-level manager to move here because there aren't any houses. So
That's true.
I'm trying to sort of say at the Housing Development Fund, is there a way that you could use some of this IDA funding for the more workforce piece that might be, assembling land, putting in some of the water and sewer infrastructure, the roads, to write down some of the cost of development. But then how do you make the case for that? I don't really know. I mean, the pushback that I know I'm going to get is, we only do affordable.
Right.
And the community development block grant monies, you can only do affordable. But if there's a needs assessment and there's need for these kinds of units, and this is more flexible funding from the IDA, can it go to support more of that workforce piece?
Right.
And I don't know the answer to that.
Incentive ratio would be, like the number of units you'd produce would be relatively low, to Nels's point from the email chain. That basically like doing the for sale just requires a much deeper subsidy, right? So it's like, if we're thinking about, sort of like what we're actually going to get as a community, in my mind, I feel like, the more affordable units you build, if you build enough affordable units, eventually you'll see freeing up of single family and duplex housing stock in the flats, by putting folks who are renting anyway in newer, nicer 10-unit buildings or whatever. Then, you still get those homes. They're just renovated older homes rather than brand new homes.
Maybe.
So, I think that our housing crisis is so deep by unit count that it's like, that in my mind needs to continue to be a focus. I was talking to a realtor friend who has 3 listings in February, which is more than 90% of the agents in this market. There's something like 52 homes on the market total. Or 54 or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the number is, but it's small. For her 3 listings, she got 52 offers. And it's just like, that's, just really shocking the degree to which it's like that many people are fighting over that few homes. There's not going to be nothing but cost escalation, and the quality doesn't matter, which is a real huge problem in our community.
It is.
A quick question on the data, just I'm thinking about the April Community Housing Development Fund meeting. Which of these 2023 numbers do you think are solid? That are actually going, that they can count on to kind of commit? And
I'm going to update this and send it to Megan. I think Arno Ithaca is solid. The Ithacan likely will be 2024. Cliff Street and GPA are solid. The Breeze could be next year. I haven't talked to him about when he wants to close. And I don't know in terms of the 401 East State Street.
they're saying
We might know in a month or two.
are not solid, of course.
Are not solid.
And the Ithaca
GPA is solid because I have I signed the closing documents today. It's coming.
okay, so then we've got three that fall in the category of solid that will have funding in 2023.
Yep.
I mean, I might talk to Link before you call that one super solid, see where he's actually at. They're reconfiguring for financial reasons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you'll be able to be there
I mean, it's
at the next.
No, that's spring break. I won't be there.
even if only those other two close, though, you still have $500,000.
Things along.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah,
the
I will
that'll
send
help.
this to Megan.
I'm sorry, John.
Oh, just even if only those other two close, then you still have almost $500,000, but I mean, for
Yeah. Yeah.
$100,000.
Yep.
That's pretty profound.
Yeah, no, just.
And that's one of the reasons why we've decided to start talking about it when the money gets closer,
Yeah.
because unless we can't do, for instance, any funding rounds until we
Yeah.
have that money.
Right. Yep.
Okay. So I also included the existing policy, and there were a couple things I put on the that I thought were relevant. Last year, we'd had some conversations at this committee about expanding the policy to include the Ithaca urbanized area. We sort of talked about, are there other areas in the county that you would see enough density to actually be able to do an incentive? And determined that, in discussions with this committee and with Megan was here, like that the county's identified urbanized areas, really the area that you would see enough density. In the villages, you're not going to see a 15, 20 unit. You might see some in Dryden.
Right, and that's kind of.
So what we determined to do then was that Megan and I would go out and talk to some of the municipalities and see what their level of interest might be. We had a really good conversation with the town of Ithaca. Of course, Sue Ritter has retired and now CJ is the new planner. And Rod Howe has asked me to come in and talk to them again. I think we have a meeting next week or the week after about the idea of expanding to provide incentives for housing in the town of Ithaca, the part of the urbanized area. They had some real interest up on Route 96 East King Road. They've got a couple of big parcels that they've been trying to put together, new neighborhoods up there. And the way we left the last conversation, rather than trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, let's try one. Like if the town is able to talk to a developer and say, would this make it more feasible? And the town said to the IDA, could you look at an incentive for this one based on your CTAP policy? They would do that. And the IDA has the ability to do that. The IDA can deviate from its policy. Most IDAs deviate on every single pilot. I'm not going to pass any judgment there, but, rather than spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the boundaries are and how to extend the policy, see how it goes with a project if it comes from a municipality. I also went out and spoke with the village of Dryden. They would like to see more housing in the village, but they just don't really have a plan. So I don't think that their housing committee was really in the mindset to really understand the IDA and how the IDA could facilitate that. So I don't know that there will be further conversation out there. But what I have continued to say to developers is if, you really can't make the numbers work and, you're going to develop housing, that could you consider coming to the IDA if there's municipal support for you to do that? So there's a couple that I've continued to talk to. There's one in particular in the village of Lansing that they can't make the numbers work. There's some pretty significant infrastructure extension costs. So, mean, the outcome might be it remains vacant land into infinity with no tax base, or, maybe they could just come to the IDA. And the benefit there is that there's a payment into the Affordable Housing Fund
Right.
that you wouldn't have otherwise. And that's sort of where I've left it.
Yeah. I think that's a good approach. I mean, we could spend a bunch of time writing a bunch of policies for places that will never get development, but if you've got something that's, actually got the critical mass, presumably, we'll hear about it. Or you will, and
Yeah.
you can use this tool if it's appropriate. And I think we've got a track record at IDA of approving projects that are outside our policy that come with municipal support. I think one of the things that I want to make sure we avoid is like accidentally sweeping up a college town in something and incentivizing a bunch of projects that just don't need it because our policy says they get it.
Yeah, I've been pretty vocal with the projects in College Town that, they're going to get very high rents up there. And they should be able to make those projects work. And their student housing, the IDA has historically said, we're not really interested in supporting 100% student housing because, we'd rather support a mix of housing. And recognizing that there's some students in the downtown projects, but they're not fully marketed to students. And we know that they're not majority students in those buildings.
Is there another aspect of expanding the eligibility area to consider pilots for affordable housing projects that are located outside of the CTAP area?
So historically, the IDA has deviated from its standard policy and done the affordable housing pilots on a 30-year or coterminous with whatever their affordability is anywhere in the county.
Okay.
And I think the IDA would continue to do that because I think you recognize that the affordable housing is so important. John, you had brought up, I think we should codify it in the policy and say, we will do affordable housing. It's sort of timely. I've had some conversations with Megan in the planning department. Our policy says that for not-for-profits, that we'll do a 0.5% fee rather than a 1% fee. And some of the savvy not-for-profits that develop affordable housing have been going to municipalities and having them, they're eligible to have a municipality write a pilot. It has come to everyone's attention that municipalities directly under the law probably shouldn't be delivering pilots, but the county can. So now those affordable housing developers that are not-for-profits are asking the county to deliver pilots. Their pilots are not written the same as the IDA's pilots because they're written by a county attorney rather than someone who has experience with pilots. And historically, some of those pilots that were written by the municipalities, they never collected the taxes because there isn't really a mechanism to do it. So the county is seeing these developers come and say, do a pilot, and they're not charging a fee. And that's why the not-for-profits are going to the county because there's no fee. But there's also not a mechanism for billing and payment and all of that. So the county was sort of struggling with trying to develop a policy. And we talked, Megan and I talked yesterday, and I think it probably makes better sense to send them to the IDA. Like if they, like the fee is a 0.5% on a $30 million construction project, it's going to be $150,000. If they can make a case that for some reason they can't afford that, it's almost a rounding error in their construction budget, then, the IDA could probably deal with that. But the for-profits like Vecino, they don't have that mechanism to even go to the county. They have to come to the IDA. So I sort of encouraged Megan, like, why should the county be delivering pilots for affordable housing when the IDA can do that?
Yeah.
And there's a fee because there's admin costs and there's attorney's fees because, the attorneys put together all the documents for good reason.
And if they're paying taxes versus, you said taxes for pilot, but pilot is pilot payments,
It's a payment in lieu of tax.
right? So it's harder to make somebody pay that. So I had a question on, so you're said, talking to different municipalities and stuff and I know our planning department is working on that too, as far as like looking at, land around the county this year and talking to municipalities. Are you coordinating with them, or is it totally different type of thing you guys are
I
doing?
haven't really checked in with what the county is doing. I did hear about what they were doing. But I'm not real up to speed on that.
Okay, I'll check in and see if they think it overlaps at all.
I mean, I'm not actively going out and talking to communities right now because I'm overloaded.
Okay,
John, when you recommended codifying the 1/2 581A pilot
Yeah.
policy, was that what we're just talking about? A half fee?
No, well, so it's a couple of things. So the pilot that we tend to deliver for these affordable housing projects is calculated by looking at what the sort of pro forma 581A assessment would be. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with this program, but 581A essentially says that for an affordable housing project that's under a contract with a municipal entity to provide affordable housing, you can use an income and expense-based assessment model, which the assessor is sort of it annoys the assessor because, essentially he has to look at your P&L every year, and he uses your previous year results to produce next year's taxes. And it can vary quite a bit depending on, if you get a lot of people with vouchers, they're paying higher rents. Whereas if you get people who come without vouchers, then they're paying lower rents. So it's, the numbers vary wildly. Jay's got to look at it constantly. He's constantly adjusting everything. And so what we've done is essentially said, here's what the model says your 30 years of payments are going to be. And then we're going to take that and we're going to cut it in half because, that's what it takes to make these projects work. And that's the payment. It's, it's the table at the beginning of the pilot. And so it saves the assessor's office a bunch of hassle.
But we set it based on 581A as a percentage of net operating income. So the IDA's pilot is a little bit larger, a little bit lower percentage
Right.
of net operating income that's paid as property taxes. So it enhances the 581A a little bit. I actually sit on the tax credit project boards for all of INHS's tax credit projects. And the net operating income does not vary very much over those 30 years. It really does not. So the reason that we established a set payment amount is that it provides that certainty. And in looking, there's like 23 of them now, and looking at all of the past over time, the net operating income, it doesn't change very significantly. So to have to go and do that calculation and then the property tax lags and we just decided this was more streamlined, and I'm happy to put some language into our policy that sort of just codifies what we're actually doing.
Yeah, and
It would be helpful.
I think that leaving the fees as they are, where it's 0.5% for nonprofits and 1% for for-profits, but they use the same model, which is what we've done so far, right? So we did the Art House and Asteri using this model for a for-profit developer. They paid the 1% fee.
Right.
And then, when a nonprofit developer comes, they pay half. I really think it's like, just write down what you've been doing, put it in our policy, and then we don't have to do the notify the municipalities. We're going to vary from our policy. It just makes it easier.
Yeah, we can certainly do. I can certainly do that. Okay. And then, I go back and forth. Every project that's been built fills, the market rate projects fill before they're even open. So on the one hand, do we need to require a market study? I don't think so, but I wanted to just throw it out there. It, gives a little bit more, it's a little bit added cost for a developer. But I get the sense that there's need in the market still.
Mhm.
If we were to start seeing a project open and not fill right away, I might change my mind on that, but I just wanted to sort of throw it out there.
And so for clarification, so you're suggesting that we might no longer incentivize market rate housing in the case that the market softens?
Well, that we might require a market study before we
Just for
would
information.
incentivize for a particular project before we would incentivize a project. Some of my counterparts do this in other markets. For tourism related projects, the state requires that there be a market study, but they don't require it for housing. So I just, it's something I just sort of think about. So I wanted to put it down on paper. And the more I think about it out loud, I'm like, given that every project fills, I don't think we need to see a market study yet.
No,
I think it's something to look at, down the road and.
Yeah.
We can revisit that later.
bring it back up next year. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
we do have to revisit, our policy says we'll revisit our policy annually, so we will be talking about this again next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That was
Because
easy.
then that would be information and then you can use that when we're making a decision on tax abatements.
But that's currently a submission requirement for coming to the IDA to bring
No, you're saying it's not.
No, if it were a tourism related project, the state law requires that an IDA require markets.
by not doing anything, we're not adding a requirement.
No.
Okay,
Right.
I'm recommending that. Okay, got it.
And how much did you say that? Do you have an idea? I don't know. I'm trying to remember. Did you say a figure that might cost them?
It might cost them $5,000.
Low income housing tax credit projects have to do a market study, which can be useful to kind of understand the market as they view it and compare it to prior ones. But they have to do that anyway, so that's not a local requirement. That's for the state.
And that would be a cost to the developer. I mean, the IDA would require the developer to pay that cost.
Yeah, I don't.
No, I agree. Like, let's move on. And then, John, I know that you had some things that you had emailed.
Yep.
I think number 2, we addressed
Yeah.
the 581A. Number 1, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many of you were actually here for the Carpenter Business Park project, but we had a bit of a sort of kerfluffle there where essentially it came in where we were using 3 separate pilot models for 3 separate projects, but we allowed them to to count the affordable housing units in one of those 3 projects as the affordable housing under our policy. So we didn't actually collect any payment to the Community Housing Development Fund on the market rate housing. And there was a lot of discussion about it, and it wasn't until after the project had been passed that it actually became clear to everyone what we were even really talking about. It's a bit complicated here, but essentially the problem in my mind, so they had a 30-year sort of fixed rate tax deal on the commercial structure, which I think was 30, or was it 40?
The medical office.
Medical office building.
That might be 20 years.
Which is, it's a long-term locked-in payment that's, essentially designed for circumstances where you think a parcel might come off the tax rolls because the owner and all of their tenants are not-for-profit. You can do this sort of like, well, we'll agree to keep it on the tax rolls, but we also get a fixed deal. It's a very good deal for the developer. If there's actually risk that the property is going to come off the tax rolls, it's a very good deal for the municipalities too. It was done for the Brazano Center. And, I think in this case, it made a ton of sense. Like the medical center is a nonprofit. It very well could have been untaxable. But it's also, it's a good deal for the developer. And then on the affordable housing, they got the half of 581A pilot, which, that makes that project stand on its own as a financially viable project that will actually be profitable to operate.
It's a low income housing tax credit project. Barely profitable.
But still profitable to operate. And so, we haven't actually gotten the sort of, in the case of the market rate now, we've got our 10-year pilot, our standard 10-year pilot on that, but we didn't get our housing fund payment. And also they didn't really give us anything because we gave them such a lucrative enough tax deal on the affordable housing that it's a standalone profitable activity to run.
Can I interject in there, John? As I remember, part of the discussion too was thinking it was going to be all together one parcel, like, oh, they're building this much affordable housing here. and then breaking it up later.
Right.
Some of us didn't understand that it was going to be broken up
Right.
into separate parcels.
Right. And so, we got this language that Rich put in here after that, that was like, well, in these cases, we can consider other projects to be, the affordable housing requirement. The big problem with it is that it still allows us to do this thing where it's like, we've already given them the much deeper subsidy on the affordable housing. Why are we not requiring the affordable housing payment on the other housing? And I think that it's, in my mind, I think that this project is incredibly rare. It's rare that we'll see anything like this. And it would provide a great deal more clarity if we simply said that, like, you cannot use, multiple parcel projects to count against the affordable housing fund payment, which is my proposed solution here, is just basically cut all this language and replace it with a statement that related projects can't be used to count against the affordability requirement.
However, because of the way tax credit projects are funded, they need to have separate ownership. It can be a condo or a lease or something, but it's not easy to mix them in the same project with the same financing. Hence the need to have the affordable housing project need to be freestanding so that if the other project fails, they continue on.
Right.
So that makes it hard to merge them right into the same project, like, clearly. And so the next best thing to integrating a project together is co-locating them on the same site. And that's essentially what happened in Carpenter Park. They collated they bought this big 10-acre site and they broke it up into 3 parcels.
Right.
So that was a good thing, I think. In some respects, it incentivized the developer to find a not-for-profit housing or find a way to build affordable housing. They were smart because they were for-profit, experienced low-income housing tax credit developers, and they built it themselves essentially.
Yep.
But I think we may find another project coming in the near future that incorporates the same concept with a not-for-profit housing developer. And I think it's wise to encourage developers to want to provide property to a not-for-profit on their same project site, because it makes it gets closer to that integrated kind of mix of affordable and market on the same area.
So,
And I would say that ultimately with the Carpenter, or it's Cayuga Park now project, that, the IDA, the majority of the IDA did approve that for exactly that reason, recognizing that with a low-income housing tax credit project, I mean, that's the way you get funding and you leverage other funding sources to do affordable housing. There is nowhere near the revenue that's going to be generated as that on the market rate project. And, you need to sort of offset a little bit. The market rate project may lag because the numbers just don't even work. So that's Cayuga Park. But in talking to this other developer, I've been talking to them since before they bought the land, about the IDA and the housing policy. And, they understand pretty clearly there's a 20% set aside or a payment. And it's pretty high profile land where you generally wouldn't see an affordable housing project happen. And this developer has decided, okay, I'm a for-profit developer. I do not have the staff, the wherewithal to do income qualifications and income certifications. That's what affordable housing developers do. So they have, reached out and are trying to partner with an affordable housing developer. They've bought the entire parcel to do affordable housing, a low-income housing tax credit project on part of it. It's on the waterfront. It's going to be waterfront housing, low-income housing, net right on the same site essentially, but they will have to subdivide that, there will be an agreement between the two parties. But that project came about structured that way because of the IDA's housing policy, knowing that they're going to have to pay into the fund, or could they do something really special and have, someone come in and do this affordable housing. And that was the way that they had pitched it to me over a year ago. And I've said, here's what the policy says. You're going to have to come in for a determination. So there's been some discussion about coming in for that determination. But I think that, they wouldn't have done any affordable housing on that site if they hadn't have been trying to meet the intent really of the IDA's housing policy.
I think one of the things that came up with that, not just like knowing, so knowing that it was going to be split, like, so knowing what the process was, because not everybody, I don't think, knew that, you know, which some of you people know. So knowing that ahead of time, and then also, and I can't remember if I was on the IDA or just watching back then, but another thing that I remember coming up was what if the affordable project falls through? Or so, and then the other, is there a backup mechanism? So to me, that would be, I would like to see somehow, if we could put in that, some backup mechanism. If the housing development falls through, then they're
in default. They're in default. If one of the projects doesn't fall through and the IDA would come back and say, okay, we're
Then
gonna
they get
terminate,
no tax.
recapture, or. I mean, you could put in the policy that, you know, if they're, you know, with all the richest language, that if the affordable doesn't happen, that, you know, they would be subject to the affordable housing payment. I mean, you could certainly put that in your closing documents.
I mean, in my mind, it's like we collect the affordable housing payment and then give it back to them on the other side of the line through the Community Housing Development Fund. And I mean, we have two profitable projects. It's clear that the Community Housing Development Fund payment isn't project killing. It's, you know, these projects that get the 10-year abatement and pay the Community Housing Development Fund payment work. And it's like, you really just have to analyze them as separate things, that they're getting two separate pilot agreements. If we have one pilot agreement that somehow covered two parcels, or if you said, okay, all of it's on the 10-year plan, including the affordable housing, which you probably wouldn't then be able to make work at that structure, then you can count those units. But because we've got this like much deeper subsidy, it's like, that's what that's designed for. This developer can still do the spirit of the policy. They can make the housing payment from the profitable market rate housing project, and then qualify for funds from Community Housing Development Fund on the other side of the line.
I just fundamentally disagree. For a for-profit developer, the fact that they're gonna, rather than do a whole project, they're gonna do a smaller project, generate less revenue over time, so that there can be affordable on site, and recognizing that that's not their thing. They don't do affordable. They've got to have someone else do the affordable piece. I think that, the spirit of what the IDA is looking for has been met there. And there is subsidy on both ends. If you want to have both, there has to be.
Right. But I think that to that affordable or the market rate project, the Community Housing Development Fund payment is relatively small, but to the Community Housing Development Fund, it is profound. And I think that that's the thing in my mind. It's like, we just need to get it everywhere we can, and we can get it here. These projects keep working. I don't buy that argument personally. I think that it's, we've got a functional program that works, and let's use it.
I had a different suggestion to deal with that approach of this issue, which is relatively rare, but it's probably going to occur again. I still like the idea of inducing a developer to make land available to a not-for-profit developer to build affordable housing. I think that's a good model, because it brings those housing units closer together. But I think that maybe we could consider requiring that purchaser of that adjacent parcel for affordable housing be a not-for-profit, not a for-profit. Because I think there was a chance where, Park Grove was both the developer and was selling property basically between their own entities. That made it a little bit weird, I think, in some respects. And there was probably some possibility for, because they had that special experience and status, they might have come out a little bit better than others. But a community, a not-for-profit, mission-driven, affordable housing organization
Probably can pay less for land.
Well, you're right. They might not be able to
Probably be more expensive than the Affordable Housing Development Fund payment.
Yeah.
But
But I think, and then Rich has got this language, I guess it's Rich as the author, says that the real properties have to finance through a common set of principal investors. That was true in Park Grove, but it wouldn't be true if it was a not-for-profit as being for the affordable housing component.
Oh, and you know, this was like, you're putting in a policy that you're trying to identify all possible permutations, and economic development just doesn't work that way. Every project's a little.
Five.
Yeah, it's like,
We
why
have
do we?
the ability to vary from our policy. If you've got some project that's coming through the door and it's like, the only way this works is to do this thing, our policy says you can't do.
The reality is that this project that we've been talking about would work without affordable units. And the only reason the developers started looking at affordable units is to meet the intent of this policy.
With the 20%.
I mean, they could scrap all of the affordable units and just pay the policy if the IDA is gonna come back and say, yeah, no, this doesn't
Mhm.
fly. And they could, and then you don't get any affordable housing on site. And I would almost bet that that might be what they'll do.
But you get a sizable contribution. And it's the other side of it.
I mean, and I think that the city might like to see some affordable housing on the waterfront. I mean, that, you know, you usually,
It's actually the only housing we've had built on the waterfront yet.
yeah, I
Incidental.
mean, you usually don't see affordable housing on your high value land
323 together.
because
What's
the
that?
developers want to maximize.
320.
Yes.
I don't know.
Thinking back to years ago, how many years ago, not that was undesirable land, you know, waterfront.
Yeah.
And now it's desirable, so it's nice to have, you know, I'm really grateful that that this project, you know, came to be and to have all that affordable housing there. So I personally, I'm not looking to figure out how we could not make that happen. I don't care whether at this point, whether it's they sell a piece of property to nonprofits, because I don't know how, if there's the bandwidth, for instance. You know, if there was some incentive, if there was, but.
The reason that project came together the way that it did was because of the planned unit development on the site. And it was actually a requirement of the planned unit development that it have affordable housing.
Mhm.
So they were going to build it that way in order to have the zoning that would allow them to build the rest of the stuff on that site. You know, and I think that that's something that's important to consider as well, is that, you know, we're also, there's this project that Steve Flash is theoretically working on, you know, which is going to include affordable housing on the waterfront, because that was a requirement of the disposition of the land.
Mhm.
In order to, so it's, you know, I think that there are a pile of other mechanisms that will still get us these integrated neighborhoods. And we don't necessarily need to give up what could potentially be another $1 million into the community housing development fund, which could incentivize a great deal more units sort of throughout the community, including on these high value sites. So I think it's I think it's just it's an excess giveaway. I think we need to avoid excess incentives as a sort of core principle. It's the thing that we hear the most from the community about, is that we're just giving away money to rich developers. And I think that is what happened to Park Grove. You know, is they did not need the money and they got it. And
I would disagree. They absolutely needed the incentive to make the project happen.
I don't think the community housing development fund payment would have flipped that switch one way or the other. There's not enough money in the scope of the overall project. And I think that, I mean, we had this debate about whether or not we heard at the beginning when we started implementing this project that this was simply going to kill projects. They weren't going to be able to pay it. And, you know, all of them basically just said, oh yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll do that. And then we heard that they weren't going to be able to pay it at the beginning. So we did these phase-ins and then we did away with that. And everybody's sort of like, oh yeah, sure. We can pay it at the beginning.
No. To believe me, there isn't a no, yeah, sure, we can pay it at the beginning. There's a lot of grumbling because they have to increase their equity or they have to increase their financing. They're financing this payment before construction, when there's no revenue being generated off their property. They are not like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. I can pay you $230,000 today. It has to be wrapped into their financing.
On a $20 million project. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's, I think that in the scale of the project, it's a relatively insignificant number, but the benefit to the community is profound.
Oh, yeah.
But the overall concept that you're saying is so far, it's not killing, as far as we can tell, it's not killing
Mhm.
projects.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot of factors
No,
that
it's
can do that.
it's the labor that's gonna kill the project.
And, it's like, and that operates on a scale that's out of scale with the Community Housing Development Fund payment. This is not the thing to play with. It's like, if we need a slightly deeper incentive, maybe we need to go to 12 years instead of 10. That might actually make a difference in the face of a 50% increase in construction costs across a 9-month period. There are like other tools that we could look at to do that. I think that we should absolutely, it's like, get the money in the Housing Development Fund that will make affordable housing units in our community. And, like if we need to vary from our policy and have a deeper incentive on the ongoing tax payments or something else like that, that's sort of the solution that's equal to the problem that these projects are facing, which is that construction costs are through the roof. And it's not, they're not up by, these housing development funds range from 0.5% to 1.6% of their project costs. And they're facing a 20, 30, 40% increase in construction costs. A 1% gift isn't going to change that. But, if we had gotten the payment at closing for 401 East State, there'd be $1.6 million in that fund right now.
I was wondering if another column in this chart would be helpful, which is we have the percentage of total project costs, but it'd be interested in me to know what is the percentage of value of the idea incentive value, because that's what you're providing.
Yeah, they vary from about 10 to 15%.
When you look at that number rather than 1 or 2%.
Yeah, so it reduces their incentive.
But meanwhile, also like, what is our lawyers' fees as a percentage of, those legal fees are huge.
Yeah.
It's like half of the IDA fee, which is 1%, so they're getting 1%.
Third.
A third of a percent. It's a big number.
Above and beyond there.
Yeah, so they pay the IDA fee and then they pay our legal fee, they're paying 1.3% in IDA fees. And we're not talking about those numbers, because they're not the deal changing number. And I don't think the Housing Development Fund payment is either, but the impact to the community is so large, right? So it's, I think that considering that, like, the policy is, as written, doesn't really entirely make sense.
But the policy does allow for a determination, so that a developer could come in early and get a determination from the IDA.
On what factors would we really reasonably be making that determination, right?
The
Like,
partner is, what their financial situation is. Like, I think that you could, the community benefit, whether it's the same developer, a different developer, a for-profit, have affordable housing developer, a not-for-profit. I think Nels makes some valid points there. And, we recognize that, the low-income housing tax credit projects, they have to be separate. Like, or you don't compete, you don't get the tax credit. Like, you can't sprinkle them in.
you can do what Asteria is doing, right? Where they've got multiple uses. They've essentially condoed out a chunk of the building.
They did, yeah.
So that's a possible path, at which point then we could have a single pilot or even multiple pilots on the same building.
Yeah, but Asteria is an affordable housing developer. They've condoed out to do the conference center and the parking garage. But, at the end of the day, the only kind of housing they're doing is affordable housing.
The city did.
You won't see that from a for-profit developer condoing out for affordable housing.
As a for-profit developer.
Well, for a regular housing developer that doesn't do affordable housing.
When we had the choice between this, Vecino and INHS, because they both submitted proposals for Green Street Garage, INHS was proposing to condo several levels of a housing project in concert with market rate. But then they said, we need a separate entrance, we need a separate elevator, we need a separate lobby. And so because of that issue that if they go out of business, we have to still operate. So it kind of like its attractiveness at that level. Plus they said, well, we're going to be levels 4 through 8, and it was,
Then you have the corridor.
it wasn't quite, it wasn't quite where they would agree to keep the 2 lobbies open or whatever, but in the event of a default, then we would have to go back to one of the entrances in one of the elevators.
Okay, I want to do time check. I did schedule this meeting for an hour, I think, and it's a little after 2. Do we want to continue discussion? I don't know, folks.
I mean, what's, Doc, I haven't heard you say anything yet, like.
I feel under educated. I mean, lately, I will say the zeitgeist at council and the public at large is to take a greater risk on the side of asking for more. So I guess in that sense, I agree with you. Especially if there is a relief valve in the form of just coming to us and saying, listen, this doesn't work, and these are the reasons why.
I was wondering what John's comment about $5,000 fee, whether it should be indexed to CPI or something, because that's, it was set at a time when we thought 5,000 was a fair amount, but now we've had over 10% inflation since 2020. So should there be an indexing to that number, or should it stay locked at a round number? So for calculation purposes, and jump every couple of years if necessary. I mean, for a while, inflation was not an issue, but now it is. So certainly it's, rippling through in housing cost construction, right? So I wonder about that as another issue, another approach to try to get a little more money into the fund in an incremental way that really is keeping it level to where it was when it was adopted.
Just to remind everybody, it's really $25,000 per unit.
Right, per unit, 25,000. The assumption is we'll get it, that it's, $25,000 for affordable housing that we were hoping to get out of it.
Right.
So construction costs have gone up, interest rates have gone up, the cost of doing development has gone up. So for a private, a market rate developer, all their costs have increased.
As well as the affordable housing.
Yeah.
Also rents have increased dramatically in that same period of time. So I mean, I think that's why we might look at indexing it. Last year, when we were talking about this, we were hearing from Joe Bose that, he was thinking that it was taking more like 35,000 to produce a unit rather than 25,000. So there was an increase in that amount.
But remember that the Community Housing Development Fund, I mean, the beauty of the money going into that fund is that all those projects leverage other funding. So 100% of their subsidy is not coming from local sources. So to require it from the IDA as a local source, I think discounts the fact that that money going into the Community Housing Development Fund, I mean, they've spent $5.9 million, but they've leveraged $85 million in state and federal funding. So, you're never going to get dollar for dollar out of a local funding source to offset the cost of an affordable housing unit.
Right, no doubt. I mean, the thing that I think Joe was trying to communicate was that, several years prior, 25,000 out of the Community Housing Development Fund was enough, paired with, I think we were talking about 4% tax credits at that point. And now it's more like 35,000, that the amount that the Community Housing Development Fund has to pay for a unit in order to get a unit, has increased. I think Nels was commenting that we're probably not going to see more 9% projects. So if we want to see more projects, they need 4% projects.
Well, the Community Housing Development Fund, though, increased the per unit amount. I mean.
Right. So the argument then would be, if this amount was enough, 4 years ago when we did this policy, and it's not anymore, we should increase the amount. And maybe it's by a small amount, maybe it's $500 per unit. So it's, goes to 5,500 from 5,000, which, would give you,
10% CPI.
Right, which would be CPI. And I think, the fact that we review this policy annually, we don't really need to index it. I feel like making it, it's like, okay, well, so Now are we doing it at 6.4% or 6%? Like, which month of CPI did you use when you were calculating that? You're using last month's data and blah, 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 blah. It's like, just raise it 10% and look at it again next year. As we would, it's not a huge number.
It's also complicated, like 70% of CPI, the last CPI
Yeah.
increase is from the cost of housing.
Right.
And that is rentals, and so it is profit, it's not all material. It's hard,
Right.
I don't know how to do this part, but.
Right.
So you're.
Well, we're raising that by CPI.
So you're
looking at
suggesting,
not CPI, but looking at that as a reference.
Yeah.
And then raising it, I think it's easier to do that, at least for some of the things I've been involved with over the years. It's easier to do that and keep doing that versus going 3-4 years down the road going, oh, we need to like raise it up here and then kind of ratchet it.
Right.
So I do like that idea, however we do it.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest that we just take the payment down to 5,500 by the unit count
okay,
and.
Okay with that.
okay, I can do that.
Mhm.
The trick with looking at those numbers for what it costs to create a unit is that on average, the number is low because we have these, 9% low tax credit projects, which produce a lot of units for a very modest per unit subsidy. But at the margin, the next one that you do that doesn't have a 9% costs more than
Right.
that. So then you got to balance it out. And then how do you value a for sale project that's going to be for, forever affordable? Versus a rental, that has a different valuation in the community as well, I think. It's not a straight apples to apples analysis.
Yeah.
And we've already had it, the housing fund, and we will, I'm sure, continue. That'll be escalated in the next couple of years of projects coming back going, I need more money. And I think because this is leveraged for different funding, 4% or 9%, I think we're giving a good message to the state and other entities to say, hey, we're doing this. Come on,
Yeah,
jump
Yeah,
on
I agree.
board that we, this is what the projects need.
does anybody have a problem with my point 3 here? Just the payment structure of the community housing development fund should be disclosed in the application process.
I like that.
Heather, does that trouble you at all?
No, I mean, I think it's sort of duplicative. I mean,
Well, it's just, we have this.
it's done administrative, it's done administratively now. I mean, if they were gonna pay over the 3 years, I would certainly let the IDA know that that's what they had opted for. I mean, the policy gives you an option.
Right.
But
I
this is
just want the
transparency.
IDA to have transparency as to which option has been selected when the IDA is considering.
So then put another question in the application. If you're
Yeah.
paying into the housing fund, when will it be?
Yeah, I mean, this came up with the
Yeah.
breeze because, Todd clearly stated prior to our consideration, it documented in our minutes that he's paying it at closing. And I asked Russ, it's like, well, that's documented in the minutes. And when you're reviewing the agreement, would you come back to us if that changed? And he said that we should clarify it. So I think that we should clarify it.
Mhm.
Okay,
That was the intention of that point.
yeah,
It's
all the
trans-
projects I've said, show me where the housing payment is. It's in the project agreement,
Right, exactly.
Yeah, more transparency to the IDA.
Yeah, to the public.
members, to the public, to the Community Housing Development Fund,
Yes.
all along. I like that.
okay.
I think we've covered everything in my email with the exception of, I don't think we've actually come to any clarity on my point 1 there. Doc, it sounds like you would support asking for the housing fund payment in that case. Annie, how do you feel about it?
We have time to bring it up with the larger board.
I mean, anything that we do here goes to the larger board. This is a recommendation.
Yep.
We're not actually changing the policy. We're making recommendations to the board, and the board will have the opportunity to debate.
So you're saying that, yeah, what are you saying?
Sorry, I should say I'm undereducated. I want to reemphasize that. And that I've relied on Nels for years to give unbiased, excellent advice. But that said, I'm open to being a little more. Asking a little more, taking a little more risk, given the arguments that John made about what success we've seen so far.
So I'm okay with, I think I already said this, I'm okay with, just as long as having the affordable over here
Mhm.
versus over here, right here and here, as long as we can get a payment if for some reason the affordable falls through, right? Is that what you're asking?
No, what I'm proposing is that if they're on two different parcels, then the affordable housing payment would be made by the market rate project. That's what I'm.
Double dipping. So you have a for-profit developer developing market rate housing. In my mind, it is.
I mean,
And they're gonna sell some of the land off so that someone can do affordable housing, but then they still have to pay into the fund. It's reducing the number of units that they can develop because they're setting aside for affordable.
Right.
And they have to pay into the fund. I just think it's a double dip.
And
Right,
the
so like I just said, I don't.
counterpoint to that is that it's a double dip what we're doing right now. It's just a double dip on the other side of the ledger, and I think that's unfair to the community. Right, because it's an excess incentive where we're giving away money that's not needed to make a project work. So those are the two arguments. Clearly, you and I aren't going to agree on this. That seems clear. I think we're being a little repetitive.
I guess
point.
maybe I'm missing something because why couldn't they then do just a bigger affordable one? I guess you're saying then they would
In
pay
any
into
case.
this. So what, I guess maybe I'm missing something.
So the point that I'm trying to make is that they can do any of these things, right? They
Right.
can do a larger market rate project that's probably more profitable than doing, a separate affordable project,
Right.
right? They could do a larger affordable project. All of these things are possible and all of them remain possible under any structure here. The thing that I'm stating that I believe to be the case is that it's when you split this up and you give them the half of 581A assessment on the affordable side of the property line, that's such a large incentive from what that project would otherwise have paid that now negates the need to give away the community housing development fund payment on the market rate side of the line. That difference, even if you just said, well, otherwise it would be 581A and now it's half of 581A, is a lot more total net dollars than the community housing development fund payment is. And these two things are separate standalone activities that can be done profitably independent of one another, as has been demonstrated by like other for-profit developers doing affordable housing as standalone projects. So, if we can convince these entities to do these projects this way through, the use of PUD agreements, incentive-based zoning, all sorts of other things that might give us yet more benefits, such as additional housing units total, et cetera. We should do all those things, but we should also require all market rate projects to pay their affordable housing development fund payment because it's a relatively small number. It's not going to be game changing, but it would be profound to the community housing.
So it reduces the incentive for a developer to convey land to a not-for-profit for affordable housing,
Yeah.
essentially, because you still have to pay your 20%, right?
Yep.
You have to meet that. And that's one of the hardest things to find in our community is land to build an affordable housing project on. So I think there's a value there to convey or make available some real estate you can build affordable housing on, because that's trickier to find in Ithaca than that's a real challenge for not-for-profits. I think there's a value that we should recognize to just making that land available in an area where the zoning supports, enough density to build it with the zoning. So I think that's something to consider, because usually it's a for-profit who get the option on the agreements, get the option on the land or pay out, the bigger purchase price for the land. And then, they have that flexibility to make a negotiated deal. If it doesn't work, they can always go back and do, without it, right? So, but I'm open to whether you think there's extracting as much for excess profit or the deal as possible. Maybe it's like you have to make sure that land is conveyed at below market value at some percentage of assessed value or something to be eligible for that or something like that, because land is not one of the tax credit eligible expenses that you can raise equity on. So land value higher land purchases doesn't work well for INHS or
Right.
any not-for-profit
Right.
that's doing it. So maybe there's something there to explore that it's okay if you're providing that land at a very, at a good price for them.
I mean, all of those costs are gonna be far and away more than the community housing development fund payment.
I think you said a really important thing there, Nels, is that if you did that, you're disincentivizing a market rate developer to partner
Yeah.
or to otherwise sell off part of the land for affordable housing. I think you're creating a disincentive.
And maybe there's a way you can work it there, so it's an even. I don't know. I don't support the changes you're recommending for those reasons. But,
I mean,
you know,
I guess absent anything else, how about a statement that it has to be sold to a nonprofit? I mean, I like that idea. I think that solves, I mean, I think that we gave away a big giveaway to Park Grove that we should not have,
They were a unique developer who
Yeah.
had a for-profit.
right? Well, and meanwhile, a big pile of like on the board of Cuba Medical Center and all sorts of other blah, blah, blah. I mean, that there's conflicts of interest involved in that shouldn't have been there. So, maybe if we remove those conflicts by stating that you have to sell it to a nonprofit, then that would be a
It's a positive.
equitable solution.
So what if they can't sell it to a nonprofit?
Well, then it's built into their deal. It can be
And they're-
incorporated.
Pay the payment.
Yeah,
And could do all affordable
They
housing.
could do all affordable, they could do all market rate, they can do whatever.
Or I'm sorry, they could do all market rate and
Right.
pay into the fund.
Right, and pay into the fund. Which is always an option. They can always do that, right? So I would support that as a change.
That one seems easy.
Mhm.
Easier.
Okay, so we'll make that.
So why don't I draft up some modifications to the policy? I'll send them around for circulation. If there's lots of discussion, we'll have another meeting.
Mhm.
How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Good news is the policy is generating a lot of revenue for the community housing development.
Or will, in the not
Yeah,
too
right.
distant future, we all
We
hope.
agree that all these closings are going to occur, yeah, right.
Everybody?
Thank you.
Oh, John.
I'm not signing enough documents.